Thank you for coming to Chamber University. We are happy to have with us today Jane Cabrera with Jane Cabrera Coaching. Today we'll be talking about expectations and agreements. And with that, I'd like to introduce Jane Cabrera. You need to unmute.
I'm muted. Wow. Oh, you must have muted everyone. Thank you, Robert. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Expectations versus Agreements. This is one of my absolute favorite topics. I've been working in the world of coaching and training and personal development for many years now. And I know the first time I came across this distinction between expectations and agreements, I was completely blown away because I thought, after I had done so much personal development work, this concept was like so simple. And I couldn't believe that I had never heard it before and never understood it before. And I found it really, for me, to be a game changer in how I communicated. It made a huge difference for me, not only in my personal life, but also in my business life. And I'm curious to hear from you. So most of you are here, I think almost all of you actually are here by my invitation or invited by someone else here, but I'm curious to hear from you, and we can enter in the chat box. We can have a little fun entering some answers in the chat box. I want to hear, do you have any expectations for today? Who has expectations for the presentation today? And since I know most of you already, this is sort of, we can have a little fun with that. So come on, don't be shy, don't be shy. Oh, there's, hi Yolanda. Welcome. Hello, Tanya Jackson, welcome. You're on mute, I'm just saying hello. Okay, so great. Sandra's here to learn the difference between the two, expectations and agreements. And I think that's great. I really appreciate that. I know for myself, I didn't realize so much that there was a difference. And if you're not clear on what the difference is, this workshop will definitely clarify that for you. For those of you who have just come in, the question I had is, do you have any expectations for the presentation today? If you do, I'd love for you to share them in the chat box. I just want to kind of see what people have in mind today. And first, let me talk about, I've used the word distinction. Distinctions are something that I like to use in teaching, where we compare one concept to another for the purpose of learning. And so in this case, we're going to compare expectations and agreements, and we're going to see like where there are some differences and what the differences are in the context of this discussion and how it can be useful. So let me start by sharing a true story. This actually happened to me, I'd say about a year ago. And for those of you who are part of the Toastmasters organization, this was actually in the Toastmasters organization. I was asked to come to a Toastmasters club that meets on Wednesday mornings to give a training. When I spoke to the leader of the club, I discussed, the training, like how long it would take, but the nature of the training I wanted to do, I needed an internet connection because I was going to be giving a live demonstration, and I needed to be able to project so that people could see what was going on my computer screen. And this is, of course, back in the good old days, back when we were able to meet in person, right? I shared this with the leader, and the leader said to me, well, I'm not really sure about the internet connection in that room, and somebody else is kind of the expert in the projection technology. So I said, okay, that's fine. Why don't we do this? I'll come to the meeting this week and we'll get the technology worked out. And then we'll plan to do the training next week. And she said, fine. Later that day, she sent me a brief text, something like about something else that had to get done at the meeting. So I said, okay, it didn't really seem that important to me. The next morning, I showed up at the meeting and they said, great, our trainer is here. And they turned the meeting over to me to take over. Now, did we have a clear agreement? No, I did not think I was training that day. I thought I was just showing up at the meeting and that we were going to work out the internet connection. I had no plan to conduct the training that morning. But when I walked in, they said, great, our trainer is here, and turned the meeting over to me. Shocking. I had an expectation that I was training the following week, but for some reason, they had an expectation that whatever she said on the text somehow communicated something differently. Now, my question to you is, do you ever experience misunderstandings like that? And I'm seeing some nods, and you can go ahead and enter in the chat box, but is this something you experience? Do you find in your communications with people that you experience misunderstandings? And I'm seeing some head nods. I'm seeing a yes. I don't know if it, okay, there we go. Thank you, Tanya. I see a yes from Sandra. I see a yes from Tanya. Yeah, so this is a common thing that happens. So today, this is what we're going to do. We are going to break down what is going on with expectations versus agreements. In just a minute, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And so now when I share my screen, I don't see your faces so much. It's going to be hard for me to see you. So I will be asking for interaction through the chat box. As you know, so as much as possible, if you can do this, this is the way I want to communicate with you. And later on, we will have an exercise where we're going to attempt breakout rooms. So to the extent that you can certainly be on mic and be on camera, I would appreciate that, because this particular workshop is intended to be interactive. I want to engage with you as much as possible. But when as I said, when I show my PowerPoint, I kind of lose visibility on a lot of you. So if you can work with me through the chat box, I would really appreciate that. So with that, I'm going to attempt a screen share, and bear with me 1 second. Hold on 1 second. To bear with the technology. There we go. If you had expectations that I had the technology all figured out, we may have been a little bit off. Okay, here we go. And there we go. So I think you can all see my screen. So again, this is expectations versus agreements. Something I also want to start with, I did ask that you engage as much as possible in the chat box, but especially now that we're in this remote situation where we do our presentations remotely, it's easy to get distracted. And so I want to just give the message, you must be present to win. To get the most out of this workshop, if you can kind of eliminate the distractions, I would really appreciate it, because you must be present to win. All the good stuff that you're going to get today will be more available if we're focused on what's happening right here in this wonderful place. So here's the question that I have for you. And if you could, now it's funny, I'm having a hard time finding the chat box. Let's see what happens. Do you all see the chat box? You do, okay. Okay, so here's my question. Here's my question for you. is how do you feel about other people's expectations of you? When you notice people's expectations of you, how does that feel? Okay, there we go. Now I figured out the chat box. Okay, so Irvine said, okay. So let me give you an example. In my house, my husband does a lot of the cooking. And for the most part, I do the cleanup. But I notice that even when I do the cooking, I'm expected to also do the cleanup. So do other people have expectations of you? And so that's my question. How do you feel about other people's expectations of you? So Yolanda says, I try not to live up to other people's expectations. Anyone else? Okay, so I'm going to make a little modification here. Okay, here we go, because the chat box is going a little slower than I had hoped. Okay, there we go. There we go. Now it's going. Now it's going. Some people have good expectations on their hand, and some people have low expectations. That is their issue. It can be anxiety provoking. I love that. Okay, that's brilliant. There you go. Otherwise, they may be disappointed. You're hitting the nail on the head. So the thing is, when other people have expectations of us, we sometimes, the feeling on us can sometimes be kind of oppressive, like, oh, and Yolanda said it perfectly, like they might be disappointed. So that when we feel the weight of other people's expectations, it's kind of, oh, it's not so much fun all the time. Now, okay, so now, Robert, you're unmuted, right? If I can talk to you for a second.
I'm here.
Okay, excellent. So, Robert, today you are my Zoom coordinator, and this is what I expect of you. I expect that the mics will be kept muted, except for when I ask for them to be unmuted. And I expect that you're going to help me keep track of the chat box. And I expect that when we do those breakout rooms, everything's going to go smooth.
Really?
So my question is, how do you feel right now? Do you want to cooperate with me?
I would like to try to do my best, but don't have high expectations of what you've asked.
And when I state my expectations in that kind of sassy tone that I did, how do you feel like you want to cooperate?
Yes and no.
Yes and no. Okay.
Yeah,
And
I would say a little bit, because we didn't talk about the breakout rooms prior and all that. So I'm a little on edge, and you have that expectation. So it's like, okay, this is something new for me. So
yeah,
I would like to meet
yeah,
your expectation, but I'm a little nervous that I'm not. But you put me in front of all these people to say that that's the expectation.
right. And so, and this is a real subtle thing that especially leaders don't always understand. That a lot of times, like as leaders, we feel like, well, hey, I made my expectations clear. What's the problem? But when I have expectations like that, we don't realize that the natural reaction for people is to kind of want to rebel, right?
Mhm.
And you might like you said, like I sort of want to cooperate, like I kind of want to meet your expectations, but there was something in there where you're not quite sure, right? And this is what I want to point out: the dynamic that gets set up is when you have expectations of another person, there's a dynamic that, in this case, like I took on the position that I'm superior, I'm doing the presentation, and you're my Zoom coordinator, right? So there's an assumption that I'm superior and you're subordinate. And so therefore, I have the right to impose my expectations on you. And it's a very subtle thing because a lot of times there are situations. So if I'm a parent, like between parents and children, or if you're a manager and you have employees, you might say, hey, that is my, that is my responsibility to set the expectations. And like I said, this is a very subtle distinction, the difference between expectations and agreements, that when there's expectations, there's a very subtle assumption that I am superior and you are subordinate. And it's a subtle thing, but it can kind of create some feelings. It's a little bit like under the level of consciousness sometimes, that people kind of want to rebel against you. And it might not even be overt. They might not even be really sure why they get that feeling that they want to rebel. But it's an important subtlety to notice with expectations. And the natural reaction, which again, I said, leaders are just not aware of this. The natural reaction is that people will want to rebel and not cooperate. Now, and now let me see let me just come to the chat box for a second before I jump to the next thing. If a police stops someone and expects the negative, the police could cause the interaction to go south. Absolutely. What about setting realistic expectations, especially when the relationship is between leaders and employees? So Yolanda, that is an excellent question. And I'm going to get to that with what we're going to talk about. We're going to use a different terminology. We're going to talk about in the context of making clear agreements. So we'll get to that in just a little bit, but that's what we're on the way to. But thank you, Yolanda, for that question. So here's a question I have for you. Think about this a second. How do you react when others meet your expectations? And if I think back to the story I opened with, where the plan was I was supposed to go the first day and just check out the technology, and I was going to give the training on the second meeting, right? If I had gone and just checked out the technology, and Devendra, thank you. So if I had gone and just checked out the technology, it would have been fine. And Devendra said he'd feel satisfied and happy. Irvine says she is joyous when they meet the expectations. And when I ask this question, most people say that. People say they'd be happy or, joyous. But I want you to check in. Is that really true? Because the truth of the situation is when we have expectations for other people and they meet them, it tends to be kind of a sleeper. It's like, I expected this, you did it. All right, great. No big deal. Nothing worth mentioning. Quite frankly, if I had shown up at that training, if I had shown up at that meeting and we worked out the technology, I wouldn't have been joyous. It just would have been, yeah, that's what we plan to do. So it's kind of like, okay, you met my expectation, good, we move on. It's sort of a non-event. There's sort of no emotional reaction to it, okay? Now, how do you react when others don't meet your expectations? And answers in the chat box, if you could, please. How do you react when others don't meet your expectations? Mad, I love that. The opposite of pleased. Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. So when others don't meet our expectations, and there, you hit the nail on the head, disappointed, it's frustrating. That's absolutely right. When people don't meet our expectations, I might be disappointed. I might be angry. Depending on what it is, I might even feel betrayed. I mean, this can really go to a level of like, wow, it's a really negative feeling when other people don't meet my expectations. Um, so what I'd like for you to do now is just bring to mind a situation where you have felt disappointed. And in a minute, we're going to do an exercise. We're going to attempt a breakout room exercise that will use that information. But just think of something, and it doesn't have to be something deep, dark, and heavy. It can kind of just be like a low level disappointment. You don't have to use anything super heavy. But I just want you to bring to mind something where you've felt a little bit disappointed with someone. And the reason is that's a great place to look. If you might be saying, "Hey, I don't have expectations for others," or, "That's not how I operate." This is a great place to point out. If you've had expectations, if you're feeling disappointed, you might have an expectation for someone. And so we're going to talk about how we can sort of turn that around. So just bring that to mind now as we move on to this next section. So here's a question for you. Where are expectations? Where do they exist? Where do they occur? Answers in the chat box, please. Where are expectations? Beautiful, Devender. In our mind, in our heads. Absolutely. First in one's mind. You guys are experts. Expectations occur in thought. We sit there and they're in our heads. And that's where expectations are. They're in our minds, they're in our thoughts. But now let me ask you this question. Where would agreements be? If you were to make an agreement, where would an agreement occur? Agreements occur in conversation. Yeah, verbally. Thank you, Raveen. Agreements occur in conversation. So this is a major thing to think about. Exactly. It's between people. It can be oral or written. I love the comments that are coming through. That's exactly right. And the idea is we get the expectation out of our heads, and now we need to communicate it to another person. And just the idea of communicating our expectation to another person can really be a game changer when we think about what it is we would say. A lot of times that might give us pause to think, like, is what we're asking for even reasonable? Because Yolanda brought up reasonable expectations. And the idea of communicating is a good time to check yourself, check in to make sure, is what you're asking for even reasonable? So, for example, I told Robert I expect him to conduct these breakout rooms and for it to go flawlessly. But the reality is, when I actually had the conversation with him, I found out he hasn't really had a lot of experience with breakout rooms. So we're sort of living on the edge. So for me to expect him to do that and for it to just go, if there was a problem, I might be angry at him, I might be disappointed. But if I had the conversation with him up front and I'm finding out, oh, wow, this is the first time, it's a little experimental, that now tempers my expectation. So agreements occur in conversation. So it's time for that infamous breakout room. And so let me set this up first and then I'll stop screen sharing, but I want to show my screen as we talk about this for a few minutes first. When I asked you what's something that you may have been disappointed, think of a situation or something where you're disappointed. you can think of that as a complaint. And what you want to do is turn that complaint into a request. And I want to give you an opportunity briefly, very briefly, but I'd like to give everyone on this call the opportunity to actually practice the skill of turning a complaint into a request. Okay? So I'm going to stop sharing for a second here so I can see everybody in the room. So first, does everyone have an example of something that they could use, like a disappointment or a complaint, that they would like to use to turn into a request? Everyone got one? Okay, good. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to attempt to shuffle you into breakout rooms, and we'll pair you up. You'll have a total of 5 minutes. So think about 2 to 2.5 minutes each. You might want to set a timer at 2 minutes switch. So this is going to go really quickly. And when you get into the breakout room, just give like a quick description of, the complaint and how you might convert that into a request. What might you say? Okay. Everybody ready? Robert?
Here they go.
Okay, good luck, everyone.
Deborah, you have to accept the breakout room.
I don't see the button. Oh, okay, I see it now.
I was out there all alone.
Yeah, I didn't have you matched up with anyone. We're just trying to get Deborah into her group.
Okay.
Okay, there she went.
Okay, there she goes. Good. I hope they all come back.
I was like, okay.
We're living on the edge, Robert. We're living on the edge.
I know. I feel accomplished right now so far.
So far, so good.
Just when they come back and say, I wasn't in a room, that's when I'm going to worry.
Yeah. I was like, I'm in there all by myself. Should I wait or should I go back? All right, so that should be good. Hopefully.
It's been going good so far.
Yeah, so far so good. And I guess we're in the recording.
Oh, yep.
So we have to be proper. Where do you post these? When you record, where do they get posted?
They get posted on our YouTube page.
Oh, okay, good. Good. I know, because I have a couple people that couldn't come at the last minute. They asked if it would be recorded. But then I guess the recording doesn't show the chat box, right? That kind of doesn't come up?
No, the chat doesn't show up into it.
Yeah, that's what I figure. Yeah, because this one is intended to be more interactive, not so much.
So just to let you know, Jane, if you ever do a recording and it downloads onto your computer, it gives you, I think, 3 to 4 different things: the video, the audio, and the chat box.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of
Oh.
neat because the chat box does all the chat. So if you're having side chats with somebody in the room, it'll show
Uh-huh.
you those side chats.
Okay.
So I've done this a couple times, and I
Yeah.
looked at that chat afterward. I'm like going, how dare they say that about me? They were
Right.
talking
Oh,
about
wow.
me
So
off the whole side.
I
So
often wondered if that, if,
it
people have
records
these
it all.
side chats and you wonder, yeah, yeah. That's crazy. Okay, that looks, I can see who's in the rooms. That looks good. How much more time do they have in the rooms?
I don't know. I'm going to guess 2 minutes or less because it's set on a timer. But I'm not seeing a timer anywhere here.
Okay.
Oh, maybe it's over.
Maybe it's over. Somebody's popping back in. That's good.
Hi, I'm popping back in because the person who's in the room with me, I cannot hear them.
Oh. Who were you in the room with?
She had the phone number, whoever was on the phone.
Who was on the
Oh, the
phone?
phone.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Breakout rooms are coming down in 50 seconds.
Okay, good. Okay, sorry that your breakout didn't work.
Oh, that's okay. I can learn. I'm learning. So
Now your name says Barry.
yeah, I'm using the company Zoom, so it's gonna show on his name, but it's the same. It's Nicole Gooding. I registered. but
Oh,
I'm
okay,
using
Nicole
his
Gooding.
name.
I saw you register, but we didn't.
Yeah.
Okay. Good, well, welcome.
Thank you.
Tony, did you have a successful breakout room?
Yes, we did.
Okay, wonderful.
Irvine and I discussed two situations and things we learned from that.
Okay, good, good, good. And the person who's in on the phone, last digit's 2027. If you can unmute yourself, I'm just curious as to who you are. Oh, that's you. Oh, okay. Okay, that's you. I got it. Okay, that's Yolanda. Thanks. I see she's in two places. She's in on audio, and that might have been the
Oh,
problem.
that was probably, she was talking to.
Yeah.
Everything's open again. Everybody's back.
Okay, wonderful. So just quickly, I want to get some feedback on, was that exercise helpful? Okay, good. Thank you. And
Yes.
okay, good. And maybe Sandra, just real quick, anything come to mind for you in practicing turning that complaint into a request?
Oh, absolutely, Deborah. I mean, Deborah. Deborah was my partner, sorry.
Partner, okay, good.
Yeah, Jane, absolutely. And as I was sharing with Deborah, we all know these things, we just need these reminders. And as I'm sharing with her, one of those expectations that I had when my babies were little and my husband and working late and coming home, I look back now and it's true. I don't think I was clear with him. I don't think that I communicated what I was looking for coming home and why it was so important that when I got home, certain things were done with the kids. Because, and I don't think I was just coming home and I was just dropping everything and just started going off and why, and not having that clear communication. Of course, I look back now and I know that if I had done that, I know he would have done exactly that to make things easy for me, but I didn't do that.
So, thank you for sharing that. And that's why I wanted everyone to have at least a little experience while we're here today in the concept of turning a complaint into a request, because as I said, it's really a game changer. A lot of times, because we have expectations, we don't think about making clear agreements. And the distinction is, it's so simple, like you said, but it's also so powerful. What I'd like to do now is I will go back to my handy dandy PowerPoint, and I want to make a few points on making clear agreements. So let me start with how to begin a conversation for agreement. Again, this is real simple. And Robert, I'm hearing a little background noise. So I don't know if there's anyone's mics that need to be muted, or if you're not on mute, if you can mute yourself, that would be great. How to begin a conversation for agreement. Real simple, but it's like, just kind of come back to our humanity and just connect. The person you're wanting to make the agreement with, generally it's, like the example Sandra gave, it's with her husband, or it can be with people you work with. There's certain things that you already have in common with these people. There's generally already probably a feeling of goodwill, a desire to cooperate that sometimes we forget. Like, we get so caught up in the frustration that we forget that if people knew what we wanted, they might already want to cooperate with us. And so in beginning a conversation for agreement, kind of forget the agreement for a second, forget the idea of that you're there to try to accomplish something, and just connect person to person, connect on what it is you have in common. It can be just different things. If I'm trying to make an agreement with Irvine, for example, we might, we're in this crazy COVID situation. We haven't been able to physically be together in a long time. All of our connections are on Zoom. How are you doing with that? How's it going? Simple, basic conversation, but just connect. So many times, and especially in leadership, in employee-employer conversations, when we have the goals and objectives of the job that we're trying to meet, we forget this simple step that can make a huge difference on how everything goes. So take that one little minute or 2 minutes and just connect person to person before you start that conversation for agreement. Earlier, I talked about the difference in the dynamic. When we have expectations, we feel like one has the assumption that one person is superior and the other is subordinate. Even if you are superior, meaning you're a manager or owner, you're dealing with your employee, even if in reality, like the hierarchy of the situation has that structure, there are still ways for you to create a feeling of equality between people that will help in your conversation for agreement. And a language, something I suggest you use or think about is when you're making an agreement with someone, the question you want to ask them is, would you be willing to, and then fill in the blank of whatever it is you're trying to make the agreement on. The key aspect of this question, would you be willing, is it has to be okay for them to say no. If it's not okay for them to say no, you are making a demand or expressing an expectation. But if it's truly okay for them to say no, you then are open and willing to listen to why they might say no. And this is really important. A lot of times, like especially in manager situations, and you're under the stress of having to get these goals met, sometimes you're like, just get it done, right? Just get it done. But when the person is saying no, or they're expressing their concern, so many times they're giving you really good information. And if you had yourself at just, like mentally and emotionally thinking of them as an equal partner with you in whatever the goal is you're trying to achieve, and you're open and willing to listen to what they have to say, what concerns they have, what obstacles they have, you're opening the door to a very different conversation, and one where you're more likely to be able to work through the obstacles to get to a clear agreement. So again, the question is, would you be willing? And then listen, just listen to what they have to say. You're opening yourself up for just a wealth of good information and the path to getting to that clear agreement. The last thing I want to say, I want to talk about what happens with broken agreements, but before I do that, I want to just add something. When you make an agreement, another good thing to keep in mind is when you're communicating the agreement, you may be clear on what you've stated. A great thing to do is ask the other person what they've understood, and again, listen. Make sure that when they repeat back to you what they understand, what they're agreeing to, you can listen to make sure you're hearing exactly what you had in mind. And if they're throwing something else in there, that's again a good place to just listen to where they're coming from. So this way, it's a two-way communication. You've expressed what you want, and you also give them an opportunity to express what they understand. In the event that there's a broken agreement, and at times it happens, it's not, a lot of times I think we think of it as kind of like a moral thing, but sometimes it's just not moral. It's, you know, we agreed to meet in California on Friday at 2 o'clock and my plane got canceled. I can't keep my agreement. So once that happens, I need to communicate. We need to renegotiate and recognize that if you have to break an agreement for any reason, when you communicate, recognize the agreement no longer exists. And so you want to renegotiate from the very beginning. And the last thing is focus on the agreement, not the person. Don't make it about your disappointment in them or, you know, a moral thing. It's keep the conversation to the agreement, and that's a great way to handle things going forward. That is all I have on expectations versus agreements. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I'd like to open it up for any questions. Questions, comments, insights?
Tanya, so first of all, I'd like to apologize. I was typing on my iPad, so excuse me for the typos. I wanted this to also, sometime when you have a conversation with someone, it's important to understand, make sure they understand what you're saying. We have people from different cultures, different backgrounds, age differences, and what's being said by one culture may be totally misconstrued by another. So I think it's important to make sure that there's clarity there. Example, I just had the yard guy, he was cutting the yard, and I was trying to tell him that the yard is not low enough. The grass you cut, but it's not low enough. And he had no idea what I was saying. So anyway, so that was an expectation that will not be probably met. No time, not this year.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. It's a great example. You brought to mind a situation. I have a client that lives in Finland. So English is her second language. And so when we're working, there's sometimes, like you said, language related issues. And something I noticed in conversation with her, when I first started working with her, I would get very confused because she would be talking about someone and say it was a he, and she would switch and call him she, and the he's and she's would get mixed up. And I was always confused about who she was talking to. But what I found out was in her language, they do not have pronouns that relate to he and she. Like, they don't use gender in their pronouns. It's just not something they use. So for her, keeping straight he, she was always a confusion. And so once I understood that, when I talk to her, she still gets her he's and she's confused all the time. But now that I know it, it doesn't bother me. Like, I'm able to just stay with the conversation. I don't have to correct her or anything like that, because I know that that's just, I know who she's talking to. And even though she switches the pronoun, I know that's still who she's talking about. Was a life changer in our communication. Tony.
Tony Moore here. I think for me, one of the areas that I want to make sure of when I'm communicating, especially something that's technical, is to make sure that the person has the capability and the ability to do whatever it is that you're asking. Because you can make an assumption that they can when they really can. So whatever comes back is not going to be up to the standards that you're expecting.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I see, Yolanda put a comment in the chat box that means patience is the virtue we have to use here. It's so true. And the thing with agreements and making clear agreements is that that communication, the importance of that communication, and having what I'll say, a full communication. A lot of times we're like a little bit uncomfortable. Like, sometimes we're uncomfortable asking for clarification and things like that. That's it's so critical. So critical.
I think, Jane, this is Sandra. Hello.
Hey, Sandra.
So I think what we're saying here also, when you meet with someone and you've done the conversation, you've had clear communication once, twice, 3 times. And every time you meet, you don't feel like, you came to an agreement, but it's not, you don't see the results that you're looking for. You still find that the person is not meeting. What could possibly be going on? How do you handle that without now the person doesn't feel attacked? Like, now you're attacking me, right? You try to ask the right questions to see, is there any way I can help you? Maybe there's something I'm missing. I think that's something that I've seen in the past, and this just kind of takes me back there again.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a great question. I think that, when you see the disconnect, you have the broken agreement, you thought something was going to happen, something else happened. It is a matter of having that conversation to find out what was the source of the misunderstanding. And that's a good time, again, like you said, if you can come to it from a place of not attacking, but, a good word I would use is curiosity. Like, I'm curious, when we talked about this, what did you understand? And, I think it's important, like, if you can keep your demeanor in curiosity and getting from them as much information as you can to see what were they thinking, what were they thinking? And, and quite frankly, and coming from an organizational standpoint, that there are times where part of making clear agreements is also establishing the consequences. If it's performance on someone's job and they continue to not perform on their job, you make that clear. When they don't perform, there are consequences, and sometimes that can lead to terminating an employee and things of that nature, right? So that's definitely a part of the clear agreement. If this isn't met, this is what we'll have to do. There are times where, whatever the reason is, whether it's incompetence, not understanding, or just too many distractions, if a person is not able to perform the job that you hired them for, it might have to come to that point. And that is also part of that clear agreement. And again, as much as you can keep it, as much as you can keep your intention, from a clear place, from the place of wanting to work with that person, and curiosity. I think curiosity is the key. Get from them as much as you can. But there are times where you do have to say, draw the line. Excellent. All right. Well, we are at about 3 minutes, so I will just also invite Robert to make any final announcements. But before we recorded, we talked about the chamber is holding an auction over the next 4 days. So there will be goods and services available for purchase. I have donated for the auction. This workshop that you've experienced here, I'm making this available to an organization up to 24 participants, and we can do this in the format of a half-day workshop. So those of you who have organizations, I would like to encourage you, if you'd like to get this at a special rate, there's an opportunity coming up over the next 4 days. And in addition to that, I have also made available personalized one-on-one coaching with me, 3 sessions of personalized one-on-one coaching with me, 1 hour each, that will also be available on our auction site. And with that, I want to thank you all for your participation today. And Robert.
Yes, Jane. Jane, I want to
going back
thank
to
you. Thank you definitely for doing this Chamber University expectations versus agreements. As always, it is our pleasure to have you as a speaker and trainer for our Chamber University. Folks, if you want more information, definitely check out our website. Jane is a regular instructor for us, but also just check out our website to get more information specifically about Jane. On behalf of the board of directors and myself, Jane, thank you very much, and everybody else, thank you and have a great day as we finish up today.